I'm Mike Bodkin. I'm the director of Rites of Passage, a nonprofit organization located in Santa Rosa, California. We've kind of gone astray, and we're making war on life in a lot of ways. There's so many different ways of expressing this. One is that we're alienated from our roots, which are we're part of this creation, as Chief Seattle said. We didn't weave it; we're one of the strands. So to find our place in the balance of that means discovering the world, discovering the beauty of this world, and then being committed to helping to restore it or preserve it. But there's also a human dimension to this, which is there's a natural order to our human cycle, to the discovery of ourselves through the seasons of our own lives. And the failure of initiation, the lack of initiation, means that people really don't go through a process of self-discovery and of recognizing the changes they need to make and claim as they enter into their adulthood and then beyond. So it leaves people confused about who they are, what their gifts are, what they're here for. We've had in these workshops people who were firemen, we've had people who were doctors, people who were therapists, and there's a common thread, which is they're all looking to be of service in the world, and they're all looking also to give gifts that are their most deep qualities. This work helps to locate that pathway from the childhood to the adult through self-knowledge, through self-understanding. So it's an ancient tradition. It's quite powerful for both personal healing and for the planet. So I had discovered backpacking, and I love nature, and I hadn't really yet found a lot of my spirituality, but I'd done some work in that area, and I had trained as a therapist. So there were these, and I also love music, and I like to play. Everything was kind of compartmentalized. Like I did counseling with people in a clinic, and I did backpacking trips for recreation, and I played music with friends, and my spirituality was a little bit on hold, but I had done some valuable work in that way. When I found this work, it stirred me down deep inside, because it allowed the gifts of who I was to be present, and also the joy of being in nature always felt comfortable to me. The challenge for me was returning home, and I wasn't really prepared after my first vision quest to come back. A lot had been stirred up, and I also, to be honest, had a lot of wounds that I had worked on in my own healing, that this work kind of caught by the roots and started to shake, and it took me a long time to get to the bottom of some of that. It was pretty deep stuff, but nothing had even touched it the way this did when I discovered it. So it gave me a pathway and a lot of joy that we could sit around and play music out in the wilderness, but there was an intention, and there was ceremony, which I had never run into, to hold the whole thing and to bind it. There was a spirituality that was earth-based, which I had never run into, but which I immediately sang with joy to. It was like, oh yeah. And I would say to any young person, the opportunity to discover who you are in a challenging way that really draws on your deepest self. It might be one of the hardest things you've done. When people come back, they'll often tell us that it was challenging, but it's not physically challenging, not in the sense of, a 100-mile run or something like that. It's actually not like that at all. It pulls you inside yourself. So that's what it did for me, and it put me on a path. And I remember at that time I was exploring a lot of things. I was in a men's group, and I'd done a few workshops with Robert Bly, and I had become a fan and was really interested in his work. And I turned on some of the men in my men's group to Robert Bly at that early time, before he'd become famous. And then I came down one day and said, well, I've just done this Vision Quest thing and it's kind of blown me away, and this is really and they're going, oh, come on, that's just your latest fad, you know. You brought us this, now you bring us this. 30 years later, I'm still there. It definitely resonated. It felt a lot like the feeling one has when one meets one's soulmate. I met my soul activity, and I knew I needed to be involved in it.
Great.
This workshop has been really strong for me, and one of the lessons I keep learning and learn here more is the form. It's like the actual structure of the 4 directions and the energies in them it carries people through a complete cycle where they really discover their wholeness by looking into these shields that represent these energies, and they represent a life cycle. So by listening to people's stories framed in that way, you get a tremendous map of human potential. And it's easy for me. All I have to do is a reasonable job of framing what the category is, where we are now. We're working with this one, and this is where it comes up, and this is how it might look. And then people bring back the stories. And the stories are incredible, right? They're beautiful, they're rich, they're complex. So the workshop is a community effort. And more the work I do is building community with the groups I work with and letting that carry the heart of the thing. And I live in community, and I'm learning to trust that more and more. Even temporary communities have a tremendous power. So if we say in the work you're not doing it for yourself alone, it's like you're finding your gift, and in the North Shield you're giving it away, you're supporting and loving others and doing community. The workshop is an example of that as people discover themselves and they share and support each other, this amazing network of care and beauty emerges. And much like the work we do with the Vision Quest, it's quite diverse, and each person has a unique story, and it would be horrible to think that people look alike. They don't, and their stories aren't alike. But the network of stories builds to like the facets of a jewel. You really see the reflection of that shield in those facets. And then, so for me, it's just a lot of joy in getting to meet wonderful people. I feel I'm getting less important even as I get better at this work, which is the group is wonderful, and it's their work, and I get the pleasure of being able to build a container and witness it.
That's great.
It was founded in the 70s, and I think it incorporated in 1977 by Stephen Foster and Meredith Little Foster, who lived in a little house which was up a steep driveway across a road from where I worked in Novato, California. And I worked for the Novato Police Department as a counselor in this house on Sherman Avenue. And right across the Long Avenue, they rented this house where they ran this organization. And I ran into them at functions around town, and I would see them walking by the place I worked to go get coffee, and at a little coffee shop next door. And eventually I got to speaking with them and got enticed to sign up for a program. But they were visionaries. She's still alive. Stephen died a few years ago. And they ran the organization for several years. And they had been students of Jaime Storm, a Native American Métis author and teacher, and they had permission to give this model that he had published about and written and spoken about in his books, which was this 4 directions model with a lot of meaning and a lot of practical suggestions for how to use it for the work they were trying to do, which was to take people out and reinitiate meaningful rites of passage in Western cultures. Their rites of passage, under their guidance, was probably the first organization devoted to doing rites of passage again in the Western, and certainly in the U.S. in a long time. Who knows how long. So it was really significant. And then after a few years they left and started another organization, and eventually I became the director. So, but I trained with them for a couple of years before that. You know, there's different ways of knowing things, and just because you turn 21 and you're told you're an adult doesn't mean you feel like an adult in your bones. Your brain tells you you are, your reason, but emotionally there's a lot of baggage, there's stuff you haven't looked back on, you haven't really done anything to make a transition meaningful. And maybe you went out and got drunk. That didn't make it meaningful. The reason for life transition ceremonies is for people to get it in their bones and to know it. And Helen Luke's quote, flesh knows but spirit knows it knows. There's another level of knowing where you just know, where you've been through it, and you have to be tested to some extent to come to that kind of knowledge. You have to feel it in your guts and in your bones. So by going through the ceremony, you get to mark where you've been, where you are, and where you're going. And without that information, you're kind of lost and you're stumbling around. There are many people who aren't really adults, but they're in adult bodies. There are other people who there's a piece missing, and it isn't always marking moving forward. People may come to the program saying, I'm going to, you know, I'm taking this important job, and I'm going to, but then when they're there, their heart starts to sing, and their heart gives them a different message. But it's also important as a chance to listen to your truth. And when you line up your inner truth and the marking of it through a ceremony, what you end up doing is marking what so as you move into this next stage. And what so may be more what you thought, it may be different than what you thought, it may be radically different than what you thought. You may go out there and discover that people have come back. I'm not saying this happens a lot, but once in a while people have said, I need to change careers. You know, I'm not living my inner truth. So marking a real coming of age at a certain point or a certain stage might be coming into alignment with what's in your heart, what's in your soul. So it can be very important. It also is important for long-standing crises that don't go anywhere, where people have come who have been in and out of depression for years and years, and they finally look through to the bottom of it, really. I've been told many times it's like worth 2 years of therapy at least. So when you see to the bottom of it, you may not fix it, but you really see to the bottom of it, and then you mark a change. You go, I'm going to go back, and I'm going to change these things in my life that are really clear to me now are bringing on this crisis that I need to finally get through. So there are a lot of people who live in a kind of permanent crisis, and it can be incredibly valuable for resolving, or at least not staying stuck, for moving to the next thing and getting on with it. There are many other reasons I could give. There's probably such a whole host of reasons. One is for the world, not just for the individual, but people who are initiated, who know themselves and who know who they are. They line up as powerful forces for life. And there's a lot of forces in the world that are not for life. They're operating out of pure ego or out of delusion. And to have people who are in that mode can help change the world. I really believe that.